Hello and welcome back to my writing vlog series. I am still working on Project Katrina. This is writing vlog number 29 and I'm filming this on the 19th of November 2025. In this writing vlog I'm going to read through 3 chapters if all goes well, and those are chapter 15, 16 and 17. And then in the next writing vlog I'm going to write a completely new chapter for chapter number 18. In the previous writing vlog I read through 2 chapters and I just checked it before I started filming, and those 2 chapters are exactly 7,800 words in total. And so I figured that doing 3 chapters in one writing vlog wouldn't be that much more work for me. But actually these chapters are longer, and there are 3 chapters, but in total they are about 14,400 words long. So half of that would be 1.5 chapters, and that would approximately correspond to 2 chapters of 7,800 words. But the chapters are longer now. One of them is quite short, but the other one, or one of the others, is very long, and then I have a medium length chapter, I think. What I'm going to do is just read through all of them. I will make notes for myself along the way for each chapter, and then I will get back to you and talk to you about what I have done with each of the 3 chapters that I'm going to work on now. I had made a note for myself about chapter 15, saying something like maybe I could move it back, but I have corrected myself in that document with the old and the new outline, saying that I don't think I can move it back because then things will change in a weird way, and I like that the chapter 15 is the logical continuation of the chapter before, and if I move it back then things will get messed up. And I like to write chronologically, and I like chronological stories because it makes sense to me that we start at one point and doing it backwards for me, so it's right for you. But I'm starting over here, and then things change and things evolve and we meet other characters, and then it's a logical continuation of what has come before. But if I move the chapter back, then it will get weird. I would have to change a lot of things for it to fit, and I don't really think it would fit if I moved it anyway. And even if I change something in the chapter to try and make it fit in there, then it doesn't really make any sense. But I think it's all right where it is. We're still in, or I was still in, the fun and games section, and now things are changing again and we're getting into a more serious part of the story now. So I like that there are these highs and lows over the course of the story that the readers will go on along with my main character. So it's not all sunshine and rainbows or heavy rain and cold. I compare this to weather, but it could also be compared to other things. And this roller coaster analogy is quite important, I think, because in life you don't go through life equally happy all the way. You experience highs where you're happy and things are going great, but then other things go wrong and you are sad or mad, disappointed or whatever. So there are these highs and lows in real life as well as in stories, and in order for my stories to seem real and to be like it could be a real event or real events happening, the story has to reflect real life in that sense. So the characters experience highs and lows as well as real people do. But yes, that was a side note. I am going to read through these 3 chapters, and then I will get back to you and talk to you about them. But I hope that the chapters are basically done I have gone through them once before, and now I'm going to, or this phase is the bigger edits, but I have done all the work beforehand, and now I just need to adjust some chapters, and I have taken out complete chapters before, so there are these gaps in my story that I have to fill in with other things that I think are more relevant and necessary to include. But yes, I'll get to work.
Father, mother, father, mother, I thought I could handle it on my own. I thought I could break through in this town. But now I really understand the responsibility in a parent's hand. When I was a perfect child, I didn't understand that others could be so wild. Father, mother, listen to what I say. I'm soon moving away. Don't ask me to stay. Please won't you pay, 'cause I'm moving to May. Father, mother, I thought I could forget about the past. I thought I could find a future fast. But now I've come to know that there is a cruel world below. One of my friends had birthday, but all his other friends stayed away. Father, mother, listen to what I say. I'm soon moving away. Don't ask me to stay. Please won't you pay, 'cause I'm moving today. Father, mother, I thought I could never find a boyfriend. I thought my pain would never mend. But now I've come to know there's a guy who loves me so. We live in love and joy. He's the first to not treat me like a toy. Father, mother, listen to what I say. I have moved away. You didn't ask me to stay, and you would pay, and now I live with day. Listen to this, I give you both a kiss. I will come to miss you in many ways. In a pair of days, I'll see you soon when I see the moon. I love the both of you, and all I have said is true. This is meant from a good heart. All the words right from start. You have given me values in my life to be a good mother and wife. So many things I could never learn from another person. I love you. Father, mother, listen to what I say. I have moved away. You didn't ask me to stay, and you would pay, and now I live with day. Listen to this, I give you both a kiss. I will come to miss you in many ways. In a pair of days, I'll see you soon when I see the moon. I love the both of you, and all I have said is true. This is meant from a good heart. All the words are right from start. You have given me values in my life to be a good mother and wife. So many things I could never learn from another person. I love you.
Hello again. It's it's about 3 hours later, maybe 3.5 hours later, but I'm done reading chapters 15, 16, and 17. Chapter 15 was quite short when I started reading it, but I have changed a lot of things in it, and I think I added about 1,500 words to the chapter, so it's actually quite long now. Not too long. I don't think it's longer than the next two chapters, but I added stuff because it needed to reflect what I have written earlier, and I adjusted something because it would otherwise clash with what I have written in earlier chapters. Because I have managed to, I hope I have managed to bridge the gap between what happened before the big change and what happens after the big change. I needed to adjust the story so that it reflects these changes that I have made. Otherwise, it would seem disjointed. There's a reference to one of the other characters that we have met previously, and he is mentioned now, and and because of circumstances in the story, it makes sense to adjust it so that the main character knows what they're talking about. I adjusted earlier chapters, and because she knows who it is, she needed to know who it is in this chapter as well. I hope it makes sense, but I basically had to tweak all of the middle of this chapter because it was a long conversation about what has happened earlier, and the conversation needed to reflect what I have written earlier. The chapter basically needs to be adjusted so that it flows and there's cohesion between this chapter and the earlier ones. Most, if not all, of the notes I made for myself regarding this chapter were basically about this bigger edit that I had to do in the middle of the chapter. But I did one other thing that is different from that, and that is that I removed a section or a small paragraph that was seen from a different point of view, and I figured that that really wasn't necessary to include, and so it was just deleted. It's easy if something can either just be added, I need to add something, then that's quite straightforward. And if there's a section, a paragraph, or half a chapter or something that I can easily tell, oh, this needs to go, then I can just delete that. But as I have talked about before, what I find the most difficult is when I have to adjust existing prose to fit what I have written before, or if I catch an inconsistency with something where I go, that's not what that's not what I had written earlier, and so I need to make changes to reflect that. For example, if I come across another instance of stating that same person's eye color, height, or age, and it's different, then I need to fix that. There were many bigger changes, and I basically had to rewrite the middle part of the story, and that is what took the most time. It's a bit ironic that before I started reading through this, I figured that it would be the chapter that took the shortest time to go through because it's shorter, or was shorter, than the other two chapters that I have read. I think I actually spent the same amount of time or minutes on fixing that chapter than doing or reading the other two chapters and fixing smaller things in those. The novel is about 94,600 words at this point, so I'm getting closer to 100,000 words. It's still not too long, I hope, but I'm going to add a lot of, or not a lot, I'm going to add I think a handful of chapters or something later on. I'm not really sure what I'm going to do about the next chapter or the next writing log, what I'm going to work on there, because I ran into a problem, I think, that I'm going to talk about later when I have told you about what I worked on for chapters 16 and 17. For chapter 16, I basically did smaller edits. There's a big plot point in chapter 16. That plot point is still very important, and I didn't really change anything about that. And basically, chapter 16 is as it was before. Before I started working on the novel today. I don't remember how many or which changes I have made in the first read through I did some time ago, where I had to figure out what to do with all of these chapters in the story. One other example of what I did in chapter 16 was that I fixed show versus tell. I typically write something like, he was mad that something. I don't know. It was just an example, but I state that someone is mad, for example, and then it's kind of like show or a tell versus show, but it's also a different POV. So I state that he's angry. My main character can probably tell if someone is angry or not, but I'd rather show that, and I also fix show versus tell in the way that I make my main character describe someone else's face expressions, for example, instead of just stating outright that someone is feeling a particular way. Another note I have on my piece of paper here is that I also fixed some POV changes, and a few of those POV changes were in relation to show versus tell, but there were also POV changes or POV switches that I did that I could work around and then either remove or tweak so it's seen from my main character's point of view. My final note is that overall the chapter is basically as it was before. I have said that already, but what took the most time was just reading through the chapter. I made these smaller changes and I don't think it took that long, but I'm not sure. I haven't tracked the time that I've spent on each of these 3 chapters. I just read a chapter, made the changes that I wanted and needed to make, and then wrote down a few notes and then did the next chapter and so on. I didn't really keep track of the time, but in total it's I've spent about 3.5 hours on these 3 chapters. And then for chapter 17, like in the previous chapter, I adjusted smaller things. It was quite easy fixes because it was just a question of removing a certain word. I tend to write how they express something. I tend to write something like, I don't understand this, she said questioningly, or something like that. It was an example, but I tend to write these ly words describing how they say something instead of letting the dialogue speak for itself. Or in some cases I have removed the dialogue tag because the way I phrased what they're saying is conveying the meaning or the tone of what they're saying. For example, like oh geez. If you write oh geez, then the person reading that will know, oh, it's said like oh geez. Kind of like that. Oh, it could also be phrased in a different way, and then it would read differently in the reader's mind. Geez, do you think if you write something like that there's a specific tone to it, but if you write I never thought that this would happen, then it's a different way of, maybe that's a poor example, but if you write something else conveying the same meaning but in a different tone, then you don't necessarily need the dialogue tag. But yes, I also tend to write something irrelevant, or not irrelevant, but it's superfluous, I think that's the right word. I tend to write something like, she shrugged her shoulders, but if you're shrugging, it means that you lift up your shoulders and let them drop again. So it's a shrug. So I don't need to state she shrugged her shoulders, she just shrugs. Or I also tend to write, he nodded his head, but if you nod, then you go like this. you're moving your head like this up and down, and then if you're nodding, then you're just nodding, then you're not nodding your head. It's not necessary to state what you're shrugging or what you're nodding, because it's ingrained into that phrase or that word. Another thing I did for chapter 17 was that I removed a few sentences of foreshadowing. Maybe it's not foreshadowing if it's too on the nose, but I I stated something like, oh, I won't say a specific example from the novel because it would give it away. I don't want it to be too obvious to the reader, but it's something like, it was going to snow that day, she was sure of it. And then later I described that it's snowing. Then it's not really a surprise. If you state, or maybe I'm mixing things up now, but foreshadowing is like if you state something was not the way it was supposed to be, then you are foreshadowing that things aren't as they are supposed to be, and that something will change, or another shoe will drop, or something like that. It's a given that something is going to change if you write something like that. Foreshadowing is fine if it's done in moderation, but I think I tend to lean too heavily into the foreshadowing and then basically give away the answers, and that ties in with what else I'm going to say. I also fixed a few instances where I wrote something like, she knew that this was going to happen, and then I described that happens. So I don't know if I can think of a specific example, but it's like you're describing or telling the reader that something is going to happen, and then you describe that it happens. So it's kind of double. Then the reader already knows what is going to come, and then it's no surprise. So if you state something like that, then then you don't really need both of them. And then for these two instances in my novel, I think there were two instances, but in my novel, when I wrote something like that, that first I state this is going to happen, and then it happens. Then I just deleted the first part, so I just describe what happens instead of telling the reader that it's going to happen. It's kind of like stating the same thing twice, and and I don't want to do that. I hope I'm not repeating myself too much when I just talk and ramble on about what I'm working on with my novels, but in writing it's easier to fix. I would say. So if maybe you get a bit blinded by your own writing, and when you write it, then you don't really think about what you have written, and then it just flows and you don't give it much thought. Someone had talked about this in a YouTube video I saw at one point, and it was exactly like this, that you state something is going to happen, and then you describe that it happens. And that was a good point, and that was something that stuck with me, and now I'm aware of when I'm doing it myself. I hope I'm aware of it, at least. The last note I have made for myself regarding chapter 17 is that there's something off with the timeline. I think I have stated somewhere that 2 months have passed by, but then in another chapter I write that 1 month has passed by. So I need to look more into the timeline in the story. It's not like it's a big deal. It's just a question of how long has passed since a previous chapter. Not exactly these chapters, but if I make a time skip between two chapters, then it's just a question of fixing that single word that is like 2 or 3 or 1 or whatever it is. Then it's just a question of fixing that. I just don't hope that there's something else that influences the timeline, so I can't just easily fix one word and then the timeline is as it should be. one thing is if you have a story and it progresses and a lot of things need to happen within that time span and you can't really skip, or if you haven't really skipped anything, then it's necessary for that time to have passed and then you can't just change one word. But I hope in this case that I can just switch it and then make smaller adjustments to fit that timeline. I actually want the story to take place in a shorter time span than what I have written somewhere. I don't know which chapter. I didn't think much about it at the time when I read through it because it fit and it made sense. But then in one of these chapters I wrote that 1 month has passed by, and so I need to weed out whatever inconsistencies there are in terms of the timeline. And like I said before, I just hope that it's a question of fixing smaller things so the timeline makes sense, or not that it makes sense, but that I don't contradict myself with how long has passed. I don't want it to be 2 months in one chapter and 1 month in another chapter without anything really changing or explaining that time difference. So it needs to be sensible, I think. But yes, that's basically what I have been working on today. And like I said, I've spent more than 3 hours working on this, and I thought that it would only take me 2 hours to read through, but the chapters are longer and I made a lot of changes in chapter 15, which was the first one I read through today. So for the next chapter, the plan is, or was, that I'm going to write a completely new chapter to fill in a gap, but I don't actually think I can do that. Maybe I can, or maybe I can't. I'm not sure. I need to figure that out, I think. I have planned on adding something else, something more to the story, but maybe that's not necessary. Maybe my plan to add this new chapter is just complicating things more than they need to be complicated. It's kind of like an additional layer to one of the side characters' arc, I think. Having more side characters and making them have their own arcs as well is a good idea, I think. But if the story is already long, then I don't need to overcomplicate things and add more only to add a bit of suspense. It's good to add suspense, but not by sacrificing other things in the novel. I don't know what I'm going to work on for the next writing block. Maybe I will write a completely new chapter but adjust it, or maybe I will have to find a different place to slot it in, but I'm not sure. I could just go ahead blindly, or not blindly, but stick to my plan and just write the chapter I have planned and just put it where I have planned for it to be. But I don't think that makes much sense actually. So maybe I have to change the chapter so it fits in where I plan for it to be, or maybe I will just not write that chapter at all and then just go straight into the next chapter. I could split the next chapter, add something to it, and then make that 2 chapters instead of adding one completely new chapter about something else in between what I have read through today and the next one. But I'm not sure. I need to figure that out somehow. There was one other thing that I wasn't sure of when I worked on this, and that took a bit of time to find out as well, because there was one specific thing I knew happened in the original story, but I worried for a bit that that one thing in the original novel hadn't made it over into this version that I'm working on now. And so that one thing that happened needed to happen for the story to evolve logically and naturally, especially now that I'm going to add future chapters toward the end of the novel about this thing that is going to happen. It's about this sport that Katrina isn't playing, but people want her to play it, and then she kind of changes her mind and is going to play the sport anyway. She's not really an athletic person, but she likes to go for a walk, and she also likes to walk the dog that she's got. So she gets some exercise, but she hasn't really been keeping up her shape. She hasn't really exercised that much, and people want her to make the best of the life that she's got, and so does she. And actually, she wants to improve and be better, and that is part of the reason why she changes her mind and wants to play the sport anyway. It's not just for herself, for her own sake, but for her families as well, and people, other people who know her. And she wants to make them proud, of course. And if she can do something with her life that matters to someone else, then she's going to play again. Even though she said that she wasn't going to do it. But that's that's I don't know if it's a side note per se, but it's something else. It's an extra layer in the story, and I think that I need to keep certain things, otherwise the story is going to be completely different. I want to keep the core of what the story is, and I think that I have managed to do that in this new version that I'm making. But I also want to make sure that it is cohesive, and I've already done some work to combine this second part with the first part of the story, because of this big change that happens, and her life changes, and she needs to adjust to that. I think that this writing vlog is going to be a bit long. By the time you hear me say this, you know how long the video is. But I hope that in the editing process I can manage to get it under or very close to 30 minutes long. But this part of the writing vlog in and of itself is almost 30 minutes long. So combined with the first part as well, I think it will be about 35 or 40 minutes. But I hope that's all right. I tend to shoot for somewhere between 5 and 30 minutes for my writing vlogs. But of course, the more work I do in relation to one writing vlog, the longer it will be, naturally, because there are more things to talk about. But yes, I think I've done enough talking for now, so that's it for this writing vlog. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you will watch the next one. Until then, take care. Thank you for watching.